They thought they owned the sky. For years, Japanese pilots ruled the Pacific, swift, fearless, and unmatched. From the burning wrecks of Pearl Harbor to the clouds over the Philippines, their Zero fighters had become legends. But legends don't last forever. One morning, high above the Pacific, the sun caught something strange, glints of silver, stretching from horizon to horizon. The Japanese pilots blinked against the glare, confused. These weren't the clumsy bombers they were used to. These were something else, faster, sleeker, relentless. Engines roared. Guns flashed. And within minutes, the hunters became the hunted. That day, Japan's finest realized a terrifying truth: the age of the Zero was over. Because the sky had turned silver, and with it came the P-51 Mustang, the aircraft that would shatter their dominance and rewrite the story of air warfare forever. Before the P-51 Mustangs arrived, the Pacific skies belonged to Japan. Their pilots were masters of maneuver and precision, flying the legendary Mitsubishi Zero with deadly grace. American bombers feared them. Allied escorts couldn't match them. For years, the rising sun seemed untouchable above the waves. Every mission for the Allies was a gamble, engines failing over endless ocean, fuel running low, and no one to cover their retreat. Japanese squadrons attacked like hawks, vanishing into the clouds before the enemy could even respond. To the men fighting below, it felt as if heaven itself favored Japan. But war is never static. While Japan celebrated its victories, far across the world, engineers in America were building something extraordinary, a fighter faster than the Zero, stronger than any before, and able to fly farther than anyone thought possible. Soon, those silver wings would rise from the horizon, carrying with them not just speed and firepower, but a message, that the balance of the Pacific was about to change forever. By 1943, the Pacific War had become a struggle not just of nations, but of endurance. The Japanese Empire still held vast territories, from the Philippines to the jungles of Burma, and their air power remained one of their most formidable weapons. The Mitsubishi A6M0, once dismissed by Western analysts as fragile, had become a symbol of terror. Agile, lightweight, and flown by some of the most experienced pilots in the world, it dominated every battle it entered. Allied pilots knew the feeling of helplessness. Missions over the Pacific were long, draining, and deadly. The Zero could outturn, outclimb, and outfight almost every aircraft they had. American P-40s and F-4F Wildcats could only hope to survive by using crude tactics, diving, fleeing, praying. Every dogfight was a test of courage and luck, and for many, luck ran out before courage ever did. The stories spread like wildfire among American crews, of squadrons disappearing without trace, of bombers shot down before even reaching their targets. The Japanese pilots seemed almost supernatural, striking from the clouds and vanishing into the sun. They fought with a blend of skill and spirituality, a belief that death in the air was not defeat, but destiny. Every new base built in the Pacific meant another blood-stained runway, another graveyard for Allied airmen. The Americans pushed forward island by island, but each gain came at a terrible cost. The ocean was vast, the distances unimaginable. Long-range bombers like the B-29s were still in limited use, and without proper fighter escort, they were flying targets. Inside the cockpits of those bombers, tension was constant. Pilots scanned the skies, watching for the familiar silhouettes, curved wings, the rising sun on the tail. The shout of Zeros could turn calm skies into chaos within seconds. Bullets tore through metal, engines burst into flame, and parachutes bloomed over the endless blue like white ghosts. The Japanese celebrated these victories, but beneath the pride, cracks had begun to show. Their air force was overextended. Supply lines were stretched thin. Fuel was running low. And the once elite pool of pilots was shrinking fast. Every skilled aviator lost was replaced by a hastily trained recruit. The war that had begun with precision and confidence was turning into a desperate fight for survival. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the Americans were learning. They studied every captured Zero, every dogfight report, every mistake. Engineers worked day and night to design something that could not just match the enemy, but destroy their advantage entirely. They knew what they needed: a fighter that could fly farther than any before, guard the bombers all the way to Japan, and still fight with unmatched power. Factories in North America thundered with activity. Assembly lines roared, sparks flew, and dreams of victory took shape in steel and aluminum. From the minds of visionaries and the hands of workers came a new machine, one that promised to turn the tide. It would not be a weapon of desperation, but of dominance. The Japanese had ruled the sky through skill and sacrifice. But soon, their world would collide with something built on precision, science, and sheer industrial might. They had fought men before. What they were about to face was a machine that seemed almost alive. And when it arrived, the very color of the sky would change. When the first P-51 Mustangs appeared in the Pacific Theater, few truly understood what had just entered the war. At first glance, it was just another American fighter, sleek, yes, but not the kind of plane that frightened the veterans of the Imperial Japanese Navy. But the moment those silver wings cut through the clouds, everything changed. The P-51 was unlike anything the Pacific had seen. Its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine gave it a voice that was impossible to mistake, a deep, confident roar that carried for miles. It climbed higher, flew faster, and struck harder than any aircraft Japan possessed. More importantly, it could go the distance. While other fighters had to turn back before reaching enemy airspace, the Mustang could escort bombers all the way to Tokyo, and bring its pilots home again. That range was the key. For years, Japanese pilots had counted on one truth: American bombers would always come unguarded once their short-range escorts turned back. It was in those lonely skies that the Zeros feasted, tearing through B-29 formations, sending engines and bodies into the sea. But the day the Mustangs arrived, that truth died. The first encounters began in late 1944. Japanese radar operators reported unknown aircraft approaching from the east, faster and higher than expected. Pilots scrambled, engines howling, unaware that they were about to face the future of aerial warfare. High above the Pacific, the sky shimmered, dozens, then hundreds of silver shapes, sunlight flashing off their wings. Japanese interceptors moved to attack, confident in their maneuvers. But when they turned, the Mustangs turned tighter. When they climbed, the Mustangs climbed higher. When they dove to escape, the Mustangs followed like predators that never tired. It wasn't just the technology, it was the men flying them. Many of these pilots had cut their teeth over Europe, battling Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. They knew dogfighting like an art form, and now they brought that experience to the Pacific. Their tactics were sharper, their confidence unshakable. They flew with purpose, not for glory, but for survival and vengeance. Japanese pilots were stunned. Their Zeros, once symbols of invincibility, suddenly felt fragile and outdated. Every maneuver they had perfected now seemed useless. The P-51 could dive without losing control, climb without stalling, and recover from hits that would have torn a Zero apart. Within minutes, formations that had once ruled the air were scattered, smoking, falling into the sea. Those who survived the first clashes returned to base in silence. Reports described the new American fighter as a silver demon, a ghost that could not be shaken, and a machine faster than thought. Some pilots even refused to believe it was real, claiming the Americans had somehow merged man and machine into one. The Mustang's arrival marked a new kind of war in the skies. The balance had shifted, not slowly, but suddenly, brutally, completely. The Japanese could no longer fight on their own terms. Every mission became a risk, every flight a potential suicide. And for the first time since the early days of the war, American pilots looked up at the sky and saw not fear, but hope. Because now, when the sun rose over the Pacific, it didn't shine on the red circle of the rising sun. It gleamed off 1,000 silver wings, and with it, a new era of air power had begun. The first time an entire formation of P-51 Mustangs appeared over the Pacific, even the most seasoned Japanese pilots felt it, that creeping sense of disbelief that chilled the spine before the first shot was ever fired. The sky itself seemed to change color. What had once been a canvas of blue and gold now shimmered with metallic light. From horizon to horizon, the air glinted with polished aluminum, silver wings catching the morning sun like 1,000 mirrors. For Japanese gunners on the ground, it was almost beautiful. For the men in the air, it was terrifying. The Mustangs came in waves, disciplined, silent, and impossibly fast. Their movements were precise, almost inhuman. One pilot later described it as fighting against the wind itself. You could feel it strike, but never see where it came from. The P-51's long-range fuel tanks meant they could escort bombers deep into Japanese territory and still chase down any defenders who rose to meet them. The Americans no longer fought on borrowed time, now they decided when the battle began and when it ended. Entire Japanese squadrons would take off and find themselves surrounded before they even reached altitude. Above Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, the dogfights were furious. The Zeros tried to climb into the sun, their old trick to blind their pursuers, but the Mustangs were already there, diving from higher altitudes, their .50 caliber guns spitting flame. The roar of their engines echoed through the valleys, a sound that carried both awe and doom. On that silver stage, courage alone was no longer enough. Japanese pilots, once the hunters of the Pacific, now found themselves flying into hopeless odds. Their training schools rushed out new pilots in months instead of years, boys barely 20, taking off in planes that could not match the enemy. For every Mustang that fell, 5 Zeros burned. American pilots spoke of the strange silence that followed victory. They admired the bravery of their opponents even as they destroyed them. Many knew that the men they shot down were defending their homeland, just as they themselves would have. Yet war leaves little room for reflection in the heat of combat. The P-51 had a mission, to clear the skies, to protect the bombers, and to end the war. Soon, the Japanese airfields became graveyards. Scorched wrecks lined the runways, wings twisted like broken birds. The rising sun insignia, once feared across the Pacific, faded beneath the relentless assault of silver thunder. And above it all, the Mustangs flew on, sleek, unstoppable, their contrails carving bright white scars across the heavens. To the soldiers watching from below, it looked like the sky itself had turned to metal. That image would haunt the survivors for years, the day the clouds reflected not sunlight, but the gleam of American power. The P-51s weren't just planes, they were a symbol of inevitability, of progress forged in fire and steel. For Japan, the war in the air was no longer a battle for victory. It had become a battle for time, and even that was slipping away with every silver shadow that passed overhead. When the echoes of the first battles faded and the silver trails disappeared into the clouds, Japan began to grasp what had truly changed. The P-51 Mustang had not only conquered the skies, it had shattered a belief. For years, Japanese pilots had flown with the conviction that their spirit could overcome any technological disadvantage. But now, that faith was colliding head-on with cold reality. The Zero, once a symbol of divine skill, now looked fragile and old-fashioned beside the Mustang's gleaming frame. Its paper-thin armor, once its greatest advantage for speed, became a death sentence in the face of the P-51's heavy guns. The Japanese high command tried to rally morale, claiming that the enemy's power was temporary, that courage could still triumph, but the men who returned from the skies knew the truth. Courage couldn't outrun a Mustang. In briefing rooms lit by weak bulbs, officers studied reports that read like obituaries. Entire squadrons lost in minutes. Pilots with years of experience, gone. The same aces who once claimed 10 or 20 victories were now falling before they even reached their altitude. Fuel shortages worsened the despair, Japan's factories were crippled by bombings, their refineries in ruins. Every new plane rolled out with less power, less armor, less hope. Meanwhile, the Americans grew stronger. The P-51 squadron seemed endless, sleek machines pouring from factories faster than Japan could shoot them down. Each new wave of pilots was trained better, equipped better, and filled with the certainty of victory. They had seen the tide turn in Europe and now felt that same momentum building over the Pacific. For the Japanese people, the once majestic sky became a reminder of helplessness. Children watched the silver streaks cross overhead and whispered prayers, not for victory, but for survival. Cities that had once cheered their airmen now trembled at the sound of approaching engines. The empire that had risen on the wings of its pilots was now being undone by them. Yet beneath the fear, there was also a strange kind of admiration. Japanese survivors spoke later of the Mustangs with respect, machines that moved like light, with pilots who fought with precision and discipline. The hatred of the enemy slowly gave way to awe. They knew they had been beaten not by luck or numbers, but by mastery. For the Americans, the victory was bittersweet. The pilots who landed after each mission often walked away in silence, haunted by what they'd seen. The Mustang gave them superiority, but it also gave them the burden of ending something beautiful, the ancient art of dogfighting that had defined the first half of the war. Now it was science, power, inevitability. By the summer of 1945, Japan's skies were no longer battlefields, they were highways of destruction. Mustangs escorted bombers over every major city, ensuring nothing could stop them. From above, the land looked small, burning, beaten. And so, the myth of invincibility died, not in defeat alone, but in revelation. The Japanese pilots learned that bravery without strength is tragedy, and the Americans learned that strength without mercy leaves scars that never fade. When the last P-51s turned for home, their engines humming softly in the fading light, even the clouds seemed quieter, as if the heavens themselves were mourning what war had done to men, to machines, and to the sky they once shared. When the war finally ended and peace returned to the skies, the world looked up and remembered the silver wings that had once blazed across the horizon. The P-51 Mustang was more than just a fighter, it was a symbol, of endurance, of evolution, and of the human will to master the impossible. For the Japanese pilots who survived, its image remained burned into memory. They spoke of it not with hatred, but with reverence, the day the sky itself seemed to change, when they realized that their age of dominance had passed. And in that realization lay a strange kind of peace, the acknowledgement that they had witnessed history's turning point firsthand. For the Americans, the Mustang became a legend, a reminder that innovation and unity could conquer even the fiercest storm. It represented the triumph of industry and imagination, proof that machines, when guided by human courage, could decide the fate of nations. Long after the last mission, old pilots still looked to the heavens and swore they could hear it, the deep, confident hum of a Merlin engine rolling through the clouds. Because the P-51 didn't just win a war. It redefined the sky. It turned sunlight into steel, courage into wings, and for one brief, unforgettable moment, it made the heavens themselves shine silver.